Hi, Mark. This is Crystal.
Hi.
You're watching the Journey Series podcast. I'm Mark for Gloria Media. Today we are joined by a special guest who is a speech therapist, Rose Griffin, and this is season 2, episode 37. I think.
37.
Anyways, hi, Rose.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's good to see both of you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for joining us. Maybe start us off with the how you started your journey to become a speech therapist.
Yeah, so I did not know what I wanted to do with my life. So my mom, my senior year of high school, was teaching a career course, and she gave me a career assessment, and it said speech therapist. And I didn't know what speech therapist meant because I didn't go to speech therapy, and I don't think any of my siblings had either. So we had a family friend who was a speech therapist, and I observed and shadowed that speech therapist. And we went to a nursing home, we did a home health visit, we went to a school, and I knew it was exactly what I wanted to do because I could help people and I could use science, but I was also going to be around people every day, which I really love being around people. And so I declared my major and never looked back. And I've been a speech therapist for 20 years now. I have, over the past 20 years, really specialized in helping autistic students. When I worked in a public school, which was the past 20 years, I would see, everybody because it was a public school. So I would see students with autism. I would work with students who just had some social language concerns. I would work with students who had some speech sounds concerns, selective mutism, students who stutter. And I really enjoyed that variety. And now I've decided to step away after 20 years to focus on my own business. And so in my own business, I really focus on helping autistic learners. And then here in my hometown in Ohio, I see a couple students who are working on speech sounds like their R or their K. So that's kind of what my level of experience is.
So I was wondering, what is the difference that you've noticed between working in the public school system and actually dealing with students one-on-one in a private setting?
Yeah, this public school that I worked in, I actually was able to see students that really needed one-on-one services. I was able to see them one-on-one. So I was very fortunate in that way. I didn't have a caseload that I was busy, but if I had a student who stuttered and I thought it was best to see them by themselves, I was able to. If I had a student with selective mutism and I thought it was best to see them by themselves to work on strategies, I was able to do that. And so I really loved that dynamic. I really have never been in a position where I had so many kids that I had to group them, even though they didn't need to be grouped. I did see students in a group in the schools because they were working on being part of a group or they were working on communicating with peers. So I really love that group dynamic, though. That's really fun to me, too. So yeah, that's kind of my experience with groups.
Well, that's important for someone with autism to be in that social setting as well. So they can form those bonds and learn how to and keep intact how to communicate socially as well.
Absolutely. That is, not the only thing that my students were working on, but it definitely was something that a lot of students who were autistic had in some capacity. So, while I've been definitely listening to autistic voices, I have my own podcast called Autism Outreach. So I make sure to have autistic individuals on. Social language skills or social skills can be really important and a barrier for some autistic individuals, especially when they go to get a job. And so I always kind of frame it that way with my students. And I always say, just think of me as your social coach, because there's a lot of people who might benefit from a social coach and not just autistic people. There's just a lot of nuanced things that happen in the social world. So, yeah.
And so do you teach things like paying attention to body language and things like that?
Yes. So that is definitely something. I had a student, I was just thinking about this student last year. He was so amazing, was really gifted. I mean, he was gifted in certain areas academically, but did really struggle with some of those nuanced types of social language things, which we would talk about, nonverbal gestures and facial expressions, and why it was important to read the room is kind of what I would try to coach my middle school kids on. He was such a sweet kid. I'm just thinking about him, because those things are really, really important. And I've heard other autistic people talk and say that that's really hard for them. That some autistic adults really note that they really do have a difficulty picking up on some of the things that we would just kind of get that are so nuanced. And so we absolutely would teach that as a skill if it was something that's identified as a weakness, and if it's something the student is willing to and wants to improve on.
Do you also use role play to help them use assessment tools to be able to pick up on whatever's going on around them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I kind of use two things together. So video modeling is where we would watch a skill being done either by the student or by myself, or sometimes you can buy prepackaged programs, but I always just made the videos of myself or had the kids help me make the videos. So they thought that was kind of fun. So I had a student, I'm trying to think of one of the skills we worked on. Oh, actually, so I was in the schools during COVID. So my district was really great. We went back, the kids didn't miss any time, especially kids with disabilities were able to come back in, get their services. And one of the girls that I worked with really had a hard time needing a mask break. And so following the protocol in our building for what that meant exactly. So we made a video, we talked about it. So we would watch the video model, and then we would practice the skill together. And then I would talk with her teachers to see how she was doing with that skill, to make sure that we kind of had this wraparound services. And she was, gifted as well. So she understood the importance of this, and, she wanted to follow the rules, and we wanted to be cognizant that she did, have a disability and may need some more mask breaks. And she did have some things in her schedule. But that is something that we worked on, where we did role play after we watched the video. Yes.
I'm sure that strategy is very helpful. So they're more comfortable in that situation. They know what to do. They know what to expect. They know who, is going to request that from them, and in what situations.
Absolutely. And I think, if any of us wanted to learn a new skill, we could get on YouTube. There's a lot of different video models about doing a lot of different things. So that idea of watching somebody else do it and then practicing it is just kind of a good skill for a lot of things that you may want to learn.
Right. And probably also reduces a lot of insecurities and tantrums and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the point, is to support your students. And that's why I felt so happy to work in a setting where if I needed to work with that student, for a little bit one-on-one and then go into the classroom, that I would have time to do that, because some of these things are really nuanced. And sometimes it's nice to just be able to talk about them personally, more of like a coaching situation where we talk about it, we practice it, and then I go into the classroom and kind of sit back and see how the student's doing with it. And we provide feedback and coaching is what I would say.
I had a question that I'm thinking about. So a lot of people with disabilities, I don't know how generally people with autism are, but most people I know with disabilities are on limited income and can't necessarily afford a speech therapist, or maybe their insurance company doesn't cover it, or maybe they don't have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously everyone's different. But are there any techniques or strategies that people who have speech issues can do on their own to maybe help them?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would do if I was in that situation, I understand what you're saying, because especially for adults with disabilities, I know in the autism world, a lot of services just drop off and it's hard to get funding. So, I mean, what I try to do, because I think there's like so much information out there, is that if, let's say that you stutter and maybe you join a Facebook stuttering support group, and or maybe you go to a conference or you hear about somebody who is a speech therapist who specializes in stuttering, maybe going to their website and seeing what resources they have, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of free resources. So like take my business, for example, my expertise is in autism. So we have our free podcast that comes out every single Tuesday called Autism Outreach. Every single week we have a blog. I'm on social media if you like to get information that way. And those things are all completely free. So a lot of people can access those. And then if somebody wants to do more, or if they have the financial means to do more, they can do therapy or consultation or take a course. And so we want to make sure we have a lot of information for people. So that's what I would do, is try to find somebody you think is an expert in that area and then see what type of work they're doing, because oftentimes it's that tiered system where there's a lot of free information. And then if you can do more, that you have access to that as well.
And the second part of that question, maybe you might know, are there government or insurance that covers stuff like speech therapy?
I don't know much about that, to be completely honest. My practice right now is private pay because it's small. So, you know, I don't do a lot with insurance. Insurance scares me, to be honest, because I don't know a lot about it. I have a brother who's older, who's on disability, and I just know like, it's a headache. I know, you know what I mean? So I know that I don't know anything about it, but it's very complicated. So I don't have any good information on that. Sorry.
Beside your resources for autism, what would you say the biggest help for someone autistic would be in the context that you've built through autism? What are the ones you would say were the most prominent for someone with autism?
Yeah, I mean, I think what is cool that we've done at ABA Speech is our podcast. So, you know, on episode 16, I had an interview with Nathan Morgan. He is an autistic adult. He lives here in my area in Cleveland, Ohio, and he talked all about, he's a social worker too. He's a really cool guy. He talked about, you know, having autism. His episode was about a virtual group that he was doing, and it was during COVID time. I don't know if it's still going, but I think that if, you know, those episodes where we have an autistic individual on, I think is nice to hear from somebody else who has autism, especially if you're an adult living with autism and maybe you live in a small area. Like I had Jared Stewart on. He's an autistic adult. He is from Kodiak, Alaska, which is a very, very tiny town. And he had a very, very rough time in public schools, but he persevered. And at one year he did like homeschool, and then he went back into the schools. He ended up getting a master's degree. He's now a board certified behavior analyst. He's married and has a family. And I think hearing those journeys, that every single person's different. Or, you know, I had Robin Rosigno on. She's an autistic female. We talked about autism in girls, which is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. And she's getting she has her PhD now, and she has one child who's female, and she's also autistic. So she shares her parenting journey and talks about autism in girls, because oftentimes that's overlooked. Like there used to be a statistic, and it probably is still out there, but I don't use it anymore, is that autism is 4-to-1 boys versus girls. But they don't think that that's really true anymore. So I don't really use that anymore when I'm speaking. You know, I think it's just getting overlooked in girls is kind of what it seems like. And I think those episodes are really good, because I think it helps people feel that they're not isolated, that autism is not an illness. It's just a different way that your brain is thinking. Yeah. And every single person has a different journey. So I know that I learn from each of those people about their communication journey and how they're advocating in the autism community now. And so I think those are really, really great episodes.
Well, we really appreciate you speaking on journeys. So we want to get every scope of resources for whoever's watching us.
Yeah.
And it's not always about someone with a disability. It's also resources that they can get, or services, or stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hope that you'll tune in because it's fun for me to interview people and share their story as well.
Are there any other projects that you're working on right now?
Ooh, are there any other? Yeah, I just launched a new course that is called the Advanced Language Learner. So there's a lot of information out there about how do we help students get started with communicating? Like, how do we help students say their first word, or if they're going to use an AAC device to communicate? But once a student is doing some of those things, then what do we do next? What do we work on next? And so I have a new 5-hour course called the Advanced Language Learner. And it is all about next steps to help people increase their communication skills. So so that's what I've been working on. That's been pretty fun.
Oh,
And how do people sign up for that?
Yeah, if you visit me at abaspeech.org, all of our courses are listed there.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, actually. That's a beautiful harp behind you. Do you play
you.
the harp?
Yes, so I grew up actually in 4th grade. I went to a public school, but they had a harp ensemble. Our music teacher, I think, was probably a harpist, and she probably wrote a grant. And so I started on a very small harp, and then I just kind of kept with it. And my parents were kind enough, they bought me that harp when I was 21. So that was a long time ago, 22 years ago. Yeah. And so I played weddings and events for 20 years, and then I just couldn't do it anymore. I have 3 kids, so they want you to play, on Saturdays at night, and I'm always busy. So, but now I play around Christmas, and actually my daughter, my oldest daughter takes lessons now. So yeah.
Oh, neat. So would maybe think of that other than it's right there.
Yes, right.
Was that a lot of times autistic people they really get into they learn a skill and they get really good at it, and especially music, they're amazing in music.
Yeah, everybody has their own splinter skills. Absolutely. And it's just nice for, something I talk about a lot at my platform is leisure skills. So sometimes the students I'm working with need to have modified leisure skills. And so definitely something like music therapy, things like that are just nice because there are things that you can do when a kid is very small, or there are things that you can do as you're an adult, which is so important to think about, and having access to the community. So sometimes that happens too for autistic adults is, especially if you're, somebody who's not yet speaking, who might have, problems telling people they don't want to be in a certain place, or it's too much sensory overload. Just being able to go see a show with their family and all those things that people take for granted are really big things for autistic people.
Right. And what you do with the role playing situation is kind of hand in hand with those things, because if they want to be able to get out and enjoy those events and time with friends and family, they have to know how to do that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in an area that there's a lot of sensory friendly types of autism days or times, or so I think that's probably nice for parents, that they, depending on where you live. I feel like if you live in an area that's more rural, you may not have as many opportunities like that. So I do think that's one nice thing about the Cleveland area.
And we recently watched a video about misrepresentation of specifically of autism in the media, or in Hollywood anyways. And they talked a lot about the autistic people being misrepresentative as sort of these savants, sort of these geniuses, and that's a small percentage of them. Could you maybe speak about that. What are sort of the range of autism that you've seen?
Yeah, I actually had a really cool podcast guest, Dr. Kerry Magro. He actually does some consulting with either Netflix or HBO on some of these shows that are like related to autism. So that's kind of a cool episode to listen to too. I don't access a lot of things out in the media that have to do with autism. And I don't know why that is, because I am doing this all day, every day, but I definitely think it is a very broad spectrum, from people who are not speaking to never being toilet trained on their own, up through people who, like Dr. Kerry Magro, has his PhD and is making his entire living as a public speaker. And people may see him and say, "Oh, you don't seem like you have autism." People say that to him oftentimes when he does talks, but he has more what he calls like hidden disabilities. So like high support sensory needs and things that we can't see unless he shares them, which he does share them openly, which is kind of him to share his journey. So, I really don't know. I think that there have definitely been some misrepresentations, and it's hard to say that, Stephen Shore, who's an autistic adult, has this quote that if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Because while there may be hallmark characteristics that we could probably list, like, oh, that's something that I think somebody with autism may do, that doesn't characterize everybody. So everybody is their own individual. So I'm sure that mischaracterization is pretty rampant in the media. Yeah.
Actually, yes. I'm kind of debating on whether I should ask or not. Just because it goes against everything I believe in, having a disability and people acting out disability that aren't disabled. But one of my, I guess, guilty pleasures, I guess, is Good Doctor.
Oh,
Do
yeah,
you
I've
know
heard
that
that's good.
show?
I mean, I haven't seen it, but I
He
know
does
what
a
it
pretty
is.
good
I
job.
know. Yeah, I know. Oh, because he doesn't have autism. Is that what you're saying? That
Yes, he doesn't
Right.
have it, but he does a pretty good job of,
right?
I don't know, I'm asking, what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not autistic, so I probably don't have a really, a show that I liked that did have an autistic character and characters is called Atypical. So it was on Netflix, and the main character has autism, and he's like conversational, and he goes to college, and I felt like some of his, and then he has friends, and I was like, I wonder, I feel like these people might have autism. I'm not sure. I never researched it really, but I probably don't feel as strongly about. Oh, he did. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah, I would love to have him on my podcast. But yeah, I wasn't sure of that. I didn't do my own research. It was hard for me to tell, but I did think that was a compelling show because I did think it highlighted somebody who's autistic, who is conversational, but who really, he really liked penguins, and he kind of perseverated on that to the point that it caused him some problems in his life. And I think it did portray some of the things that can be hard, because while we say autism is not an illness and this is your life journey, there are things about autism and other disabilities that are just hard. And sometimes people on social media act like everything's a gift and everything's a blessing. But if you have a disability or you have a loved one with a disability, that's just not true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we talked a lot about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of I guess a lot of ableism that goes on, and a lot of people projecting their own feelings about disability, like non-disabled people projecting their own feelings about disability onto disabled people, which is a problem.
Yeah. And when I had Nathan Morgan on episode 16, he said, nothing about us without us, which I thought was good, for any type of advocate type situation, that if you're a speech therapist and you're helping autistic individuals or anybody else, it's good if you can get that person's input, because sometimes I'm going to be working with people who maybe are emerging communicators and they're 3 and, they can't answer all the questions I'm going to ask. So I have to take into account their family and their values and things like that. So that's where it gets tricky when you can't exactly get that answer from the person. You just have to kind of be a detective and try to make your best educated professional guess. But absolutely, I think if nothing else, a lot of the things that are happening are good for professionals to make sure that we're listening to the people that we're helping, because that's important and they're part of the team.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for joining us today, Rose. It was really a pleasure to speak with you.
It was.
It was great
Thank
to
you
speak
so
with both of you. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great to meet both of you.
You too.
Hey,
Good
have a good day.
evening.
Bye.